Leaders and employees in organizations today are faced with a level of change never experienced in previous generations. Whether it's the impact of technology, the shifting expectations of customers, the speed of change, levels of global competition, or the disintermediation and disruption that's happening. Leaders today must have the ability to understand complexity. A leader needs to be able to have a high level of emotional intelligence. They have to be able to understand risk and manage risk and change, not only personally, but to be able to guide and lead an organization through the rapid level of change that they're experiencing. Over the years, I've worked with some of the most talented and successful CEOs in the world, helping executives reach their goals and become better leaders. At the core of my work, I help executives realize their potential by first helping them understand what it means to be a full human being. Effective leaders need to be clear about who they are at the deepest level, their strengths and weaknesses. I help my clients understand what really matters to them, both personally and professionally, as stewards of the companies they run and in their roles with various stakeholders. To become a great leader, you must become the best human being you can possibly be. In my coaching practice, first and foremost, my role is to help my clients with whatever they believe they need to work on first. I start by getting a clear sense of what they're hoping to achieve by working with an executive coach. What are their goals, objectives? What are the outcomes they expect will come out of working together? And how can I best support them in getting where they need to go? That's quickly followed by assessing what I need to do to help them, whether that's getting input from subordinates, peers, or their superiors. I look for other data points and pieces of information I need to capture so that I have a clear assessment of what a leader is trying to achieve. Once I have that, then I'm testing to see what it is my clients know about themselves, what they're prepared to work on, and how committed they are to doing the work that's required to get them where they want to be. We create a plan together to help them move through their process, recognizing that we need to have a clear set of goals because life is messy and things get in the way. My intention with each client is to move them along their path. But from call to call and meeting to meeting, there could be any number of things that come up, both at work or in their personal lives, things we have to address to keep making progress. Along the way, it's important to remember that life can be messy, and whatever arrangements we enter into, any number of things can come up. Even though we're focused primarily on professional development, we're all human beings and need to talk about working through personal issues as well. I'm often asked how much of a leader's management style is determined by their personal style. I can't say I believe there is an actual percentage, but I do know 100% of who you are as a human being and what you believe about yourself affects how you show up as a leader. To me, every executive I've worked with is first and foremost a human being. I don't consider anything off the table. And though I'm certainly not a therapist and will draw lines and boundaries in regards to what I'm capable of helping with, I'm there to help my clients find the resources they need. In my coaching work, I see my clients as a total human being. I look at how much attention they're giving to their physical body, their nutrition, sleep habits, exercise, their diet, and health. I'm interested in finding out if they have a spiritual practice and understanding their psychological and emotional makeup. I'm looking at their social world and at all the dimensions that make them complete human beings through these collective lenses. I also want to understand what their organizations need from them as leaders and how effective their leadership skills are. A part of my work is also about learning the company's strategy, where the organization is and needs to go, and the external landscape the company's facing. I look at the organizational capacity of the company and the kind of leadership behavior that the organization needs to help make an assessment about how much of a gap there is between how a leader is showing up and what's needed. It's important to understand all of these factors to help leaders cross the chasm or fill a gap if it exists at all. I'm also very aware that the executives I coach are leaders of lots of different people within their organizations in terms of hierarchy, gender, sexual orientation, skill sets, and capabilities. It's essential for me to understand what is their range of dexterity in terms of their ability to lead across all the diversity of the organization, both internally and externally. How involved I get in the organization depends on the scope of my work. If I'm functioning as an executive coach to a particular CEO, I need to know what their goals are and the journey they want me to help them with. I can expand or narrow the scope of my work based on the work they're looking to do. In an ideal world, I'm assessing the organization, evaluating the external landscape, and assessing the individual leader and all their direct reports. With most of my clients, they're not looking to take on that large of an analysis of their organization. My work tends to be narrower, focusing on specific issues, problems, and challenges they're looking to address. If I'm working with the entire C-suite, then the work is to essentially, without judgment, assess each of the individual leaders to get a sense of the strengths of the team, both individually and collectively. What's the group dynamic? How effectively are they working together? How effectively are they getting things done? Do they have mutually shared goals and objectives? Do they have clarity on what it is that needs to get accomplished and how they're going to get it done? I'm using any number of tools to do an assessment of each individual member of the team and the team collectively to figure out where there are gaps, where there are technical competencies or behavioral attributes that are missing. There are lots of tools I've found to be highly effective in my work with leaders. No matter what tools I'm using, first and foremost, the essential thing in terms of my efficacy is a high level of trust. The client has to trust me, and that trust comes from a whole host of things. Indeed, my ability to keep everything they share with me in confidence, my ability to not have a personal agenda, and to make sure that only their agenda is what's dictating the work I'm doing with them. I always try to be a calming presence with my clients. I try and show up in a way that's consistent with the advice I'm giving my clients, being in a responsive rather than a reactive state. I also know that it helps create a sense of trust and safety when my clients know I'm not going to be a reactive force. I use deep listening to understand what's at the heart of my clients' issues, which creates a sense of safety for them. Many leaders I work with already have incredible skill and are self-aware. Oftentimes it's just a matter of having another impartial executive as a sounding board, then giving them additional information, resources, and tools to move their goals forward. In regards to the current thinking on the development of conscious leadership and management styles, I definitely have my own bias and opinions. Generally, I don't believe in the idea that someone is a bad person, although there's definitely bad behavior. I think people genuinely want to do their best work, and it's up to the leadership of the organization to create an environment where people can be effective and their best possible selves. I absolutely believe it's challenging and difficult in the world today with all the change we're all facing. Leaders need to have a high level of compassion and empathy for the people working for them. I also believe strongly in the power of diversity in the workplace. Leaders need to have the dexterity that's necessary to work with lots of different kinds of people. We've gotten to a place not only in the United States, but increasingly around the world, where the employment relationship is very transactional, meaning a person comes to work for an employer and they will be there for a defined period of time. When they're no longer needed and employment conditions change, or the work environment or the economy changes, they're let go. At some point, they may return and become a consultant, a contractor, or a future employee. In work I do with clients, I encourage them to recognize that each of these individuals is a brand ambassador for the organization or have the potential to be a future brand ambassador. If an organization does an excellent job of treating them as human beings and recognizes them for who they are and how they've contributed, everybody wins. My genuine belief is that if humanity is going to survive, the only thing that's going to help us get there is conscious leadership. I think it's essential, and it's not just me that believes this. There are increasingly more and more people who do the work I do that are recognizing the importance of conscious leadership, and that belief has been growing over the last 20 years. I believe conscious leadership has two components, the leadership component and then the consciousness component. Everybody's a leader in the world today in some way and in some fashion. The kind of leaders that we need in the world today is fundamentally different than we've had in the past. The conscious piece involves leaders needing to be aware and awake. They're very clear about who they are and how they're showing up in the world, and are working to enable all of the other people in their organization also to be conscious, awake, and aware. I absolutely believe in the power of conscious leadership, and it's not just for organizations, but advances our society, our culture, and in all cultures around the world. We all have a fundamental choice of how we want to show up in the world. We can respond to the world from a place of fear or from a place of trust and love. The work I do in my personal journey and with leaders is primarily helping them recognize it's a choice we all have to make. I encourage them to choose love rather than fear. Fear is a lower state of consciousness, and trust and love are a higher state of consciousness. I encourage them to operate from a higher state. That's a big part of my work. Another part of helping facilitate change is understanding that historically, what we've wanted from leaders is what's between their ears. In previous times, the most important thing that mattered was their intellect. The journey I take leaders on is often to help them fundamentally shift from having their brains be in charge to using their gut and deep intuition as their primary guide, with the brain being the servant, and the heart is where the two meet. The work I do with leaders involves helping them to be more heart-centered, more emotionally intelligent, and also critically important, to be more intuitively intelligent, using body intelligence. That's a foreign concept for most leaders, and it's unfamiliar to them. It's not necessarily something they feel safe with, but it's the journey I take them on. There are a lot of different techniques to help leaders break through their inner barriers, and it also depends on who I'm working with and where they are in their personal growth. For example, with one CEO I used to work with, all he focused on was his intellect. He was a masterful debater and strategic thinker. That's what he valued and had taken him to the level of success he had achieved. So when I met with him, the very first thing I would do after saying hello was to begin asking him about his children. He would then open up and tell me all about what was happening with his daughter and his son. It was a great way for me to get him out of his head and into his heart. Once I had him in that place where he was more emotive, I would try to keep the conversation around our coaching session in that same vein. Doing this with him in our sessions helped him become familiar with the experience of being in touch with his emotions in a business setting, something that was very foreign to him. In the work I do, I have a destination I'm looking to take leaders to. I recognize the power for them if they can have emotional intelligence, IQ, and body intelligence, and integrate all three. If they learn to come from that place, then they can become a highly effective leader. I believe there are three kinds of intelligence when it comes to leadership skills. IQ is obvious. It's all about how smart you are. How effectively can a CEO take data and information and come up with a strategy, a response, measuring risk, and all the components necessary to determine organizational implications. That's all the IQ stuff. EQ is the emotional piece, the ability to connect with others, be empathetic and compassionate, and their ability to be vulnerable and share, to be aware of their own emotions and also be dialed into the emotions of the people that they're working with. The intuitive or body intelligence piece is all about when they have a hunch or an instinct, not just to dismiss it or be oblivious to the feelings, but to be aware of it. Bring that into the conversation if it's appropriate. Be able to talk about it and not dismiss it. When it comes to the coaching work I do, I believe the work needs to be grounded in love and also rooted in a bit of organizational theory, given my experience in education. Many young entrepreneurs have a lot of fear around the fact that they haven't gone to business school, especially with bootstrap startups. I believe the essential part of being a leader is to know yourself. Part of my work is giving them tools and resources to help them understand themselves. I'm personally very curious, and so I'm continually looking for new information, reading, and experimenting with things. As I do that, I share that with the clients I work with. Part of it's the personal journey I've gone through with having been a hardcore business person, going to the best business school in the world, and at the same time having gone through the personal journey I went through with my health crisis, the loss of my wife, and developing a spiritual practice. All of the other things I have experienced in my personal journey. I bring all of my educational training, hands-on business experience, and my own personal development work into the coaching work I do with my clients. The road I've traveled has been an amazing gift, and I'm happy to share it with anybody that wants to experience it. Today, business schools are finally looking at incorporating conscious leadership principles into MBA programs on a very limited scale, recognizing that to be an effective leader in the world today, you need the soft skills as well. I'm familiar with what Stanford, Harvard, and Wharton have done to bring in more of what historically has been called the soft skills. The reality is that most business schools at the master's level are only 2-year programs, and there's just so much content you can bring into the classroom. It's a challenge every business program faces. How do you teach strategy, risk management, marketing, finance, accounting, technology, and all the things necessary from a hard skill, competency, and technical perspective, and at the same time teach the softer skills? In regards to how I view organizations, I believe most people think about companies like Apple or Amazon or Google as big monoliths. When you're looking at an organization with that paradigm, it limits your ability to actually see what's going on. The reality is each of those organizations, or any organization for that matter, is a living organism. It's a collection of tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. And each one of those individuals wakes up in the morning, and as they're getting ready to get out of bed and prepare themselves for work and get out the door, they're unpacking parts of themselves they believe they can't take to work. With most organizations, we end up with people that are 40, 50, 60% of their whole selves, interacting with all their colleagues who are also 40, 50, 60% of their whole selves. And so we end up with the same kinds of dysfunction that we see throughout society. When I look at an organization, I'm looking at it as a living, breathing organism that's a collection of its past and all of the people who work there. The key to my efficacy is to figure out the pulse. What's going on in that organization? Who are all those people? What do they believe and why do they believe it? What percentage of them shows up each day? And how do they create a safe environment where close to 100% of themselves can be there on the job, and with a higher percentage of them that's there, you get more productive, creative, innovative organizations. The job of leaders is to help create that safe space where people recognize they don't have to unpack big pieces of themselves because it's not safe to bring those parts of themselves to work. One of the tools I find helpful in my coaching work is some type of relaxation, meditation, or contemplative practice. However, I'm really cautious and careful not to impose any of my beliefs onto any of my clients or anybody for that matter. I know what works for me. I encourage my clients to consider some kind of contemplative practice, whether it's prayer, walking in nature, sitting on the beach, or doing meditation. It's not about a spiritual practice per se. If my clients are curious about it, I'm happy to share my experience and my beliefs. What's important in my coaching work is that it is all about helping clients move from their amygdala to the prefrontal cortex, from their reptilian brain to the human brain, so they're in response mode rather than reactive mode. I always stick to the science and to what's known scientifically about how our minds function. When I talk to them about considering meditation, it's really to help them be a more effective leader. It's not coming from a spiritual place. As far as my personal beliefs, I think we are all spiritual beings having a human experience. However, it does influence how I work with clients. If I talk to them about spirituality, it's in the context of helping them take the long view so they're not caught up in a conflict at work that will negatively influence how they respond and how they react to what's going on, but they can take it in stride. They can take it as a perspective and be looking out over the course of their life and not lose sight of what really is important and what really matters. I'm often asked about what I believe the purpose of work is in our lives. If you consider Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we often use work as an opportunity for self-transcendence. We can use work not just to meet our physiological needs, to be other dimensions of who we are. To the extent that somebody is not being fulfilled by work, I encourage them to go do something else that allows them to move up the hierarchy of needs that Maslow identified. Indeed, from a Buddhist perspective, in the Eightfold Path, right livelihood is essential teaching. But I don't use that language or that way of framing it when I'm talking to clients. It is true that doing work in the world that helps you grow, learn, and it brings you joy makes for a much better life. And it positively impacts the other people in your life. If you're feeling joyful, fulfilled, and enriched, you're going to be more effective, a productive employee, if you're doing what brings you joy. In my coaching work, I also use nature as a tool for growth. There are many advantages to this. As a species, we often don't recognize our responsibility to be stewards of nature and have separated ourselves from it. So part of what I do is take executives out on hikes or in a natural setting to reconnect them to nature so there's an opportunity to recognize we're part of it. We're not separate and distinct from it. Yes, we have a stewardship responsibility. Partly it's getting my clients out of the office and into a different setting where they can be more creative. When hiking or just walking, you're using the left and right sides of your body, and you're using the left and right hemispheres of your brain. So if I'm out on a hike with a leader, they're suddenly finding that they're more creative, more aware, and better at solving problems. They also get the physiological benefit of getting more oxygen to their brain because they're out in nature with the trees. There's also a whole dimension to what nature can teach us from a system standpoint. The mycelium in the earth are a network that the trees use to communicate with each other, which science is just starting to understand. We know that when somebody walks into a forest, a tree will send out a chemical reaction that goes through the mushroom mycelium, letting all the other trees in the area know that there's a human being in the forest, sending out an alert about the things that they need to be aware of. I do believe that the root systems that exist with trees have a lot in common with corporate environments. With companies, it's an energetic matrix that gets woven into an organization, and when people move around in the workplace, whether it's physically or virtually, they connect into that matrix. Then it affects how they show up, and in turn affects how the matrix operates. As a species, before we walk into a room, our bodies know what we're walking into long before we hear anything or see anything with our 5 primary senses. Our energetic bodies picking up signals and telling us whether or not it's safe and how to respond. The human body gets hit with about 12 million pieces of information per second, and only about 4,000 of those 12 million actually make it to the brain. And then many of those 4,000 get processed by the amygdala or the mammalian brain, and only a handful at best of the 12 million get to the prefrontal cortex, the area of the human brain where we know we can actually process it. Our body's constantly reacting and responding to things, whether it's light or sound, temperature, vibrations, energetic stuff that our conscious mind has no awareness of. With the clients I work with, whether it's one-on-one coaching or in the consulting work I do, I meet people where they are. There are a number of clients I work with that I can't talk about these kinds of sensory cues. It's so far beyond their understanding of reality. And in some ways, it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. I can approach it from a different perspective. I can give them other tools to help them be effective, and over time, if they're receptive and they want to learn, then I'm happy to share. As a coach, when I work with clients, I'm constantly assessing where they are, where they're looking to go, and how open they are to what I have to offer. Many of them experience after weeks have gone by, it often feels like no time has passed between sessions, and we pick up right where we left off. I believe that it's because as human beings, if we can attach emotion to a memory or an experience, we remember that. With deep coaching work, I'm attaching emotions to each of the conversations we're talking about. And it's easy to pick up the journey for my clients and me because there's an emotion attached to it. I find in my work as a coach that many CEOs say they often feel entirely alone in their role as a leader. This is understandable as the challenges of being a leader are immense. It's an incredibly lonely existence. It's part of the reason why I do this work, because I know how lonely it is, and I want to be a resource and support to the leaders I work with. For me, while I've been a CEO of a couple of startups, I don't have the same level of experience that many of the clients I work with have. I do have empathy and awareness and appreciation because I've been around so many CEOs. I've heard their stories. I've seen the journeys they've been on. So some of it's my own personal experience, and a lot of it's just having worked with many leaders and understanding the challenges they're struggling with. In the last 20 years, I've had the unique opportunity of working on some of the largest organizational transactions. HP's acquisition of Compaq and integrating Compaq and HP was, up to that point, the largest merger or acquisition in the IT space. When Royal Bank of Scotland acquired National Westminster Bank, it was the largest merger and acquisition in the financial services industry. And when Chevron acquired Texaco, it was the largest transaction in the energy and petroleum industry. I happened to be in the right place at the right time where I was involved in the 3 largest mergers in those industries. With each of them, the scope of work was different. It depended on the client and what needed to be done. For Royal Bank of Scotland, this was an organization of 30,000 acquiring an organization of 100,000 employees. There were only a handful of those kinds of acquisitions or mergers in the world to that point, where effectively a minnow swallowed a whale. The key for the leadership of the Royal Bank of Scotland was to remain in charge after making this large acquisition. So it was essential to figure out who the best people from National Westminster Bank and who were the best people from the Royal Bank of Scotland. How do you put the best people in the best positions and maintain the culture of Royal Bank of Scotland and not just become National Westminster Bank? There was a whole host of things that needed to be done, looking at processes, systems, brands, customers across all the functional areas of the organization at both companies and figure out what the combined organization needed to be. I worked with the Royal Bank of Scotland to set up an assessment center where every single employee from each organization went through a 2 or 3 day evaluation in order to determine who was going to be retained and the roles they would have. And then reviewing all of the systems, processes, and programs for the combined organization. The majority of the people were in the UK. In the case of Hewlett-Packard acquiring Compaq, the 2 organizations collectively were in 33 countries, And each of the countries had their own laws on how two companies could be integrated and what was necessary and what was required. There were things that HP was getting by acquiring Compaq, and there were things that they didn't need. So there was a whole assessment of people, systems, and processes to figure out what the combined organization was going to be. In that case, HP was the dominant organization, and they were just picking up some customers, capabilities, and people and technology that HP needed because the IT world was shifting and changing. With Chevron acquiring Texaco, the two companies were operating in approximately 38 countries, and the work there was a smaller scope than the work I was doing with HP and Royal Bank of Scotland, because Chevron had brought in a lot of consultants. A lot of the work that we were doing was integrating employee benefit programs, helping them with communications across all their workforces worldwide, helping them with executive compensation, and some specific interventions.